Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast, where theologically trained, licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Catrice Glenn, for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives. Each week, we speak to guiding questions with real-life application, humor, and engaging guests to share meaningful dialogues with our listeners. Let's begin. Welcome to the third episode of the Theotherapist Podcast. We're so glad that you're joining us today. Today we have a very special guest. That's Reverend Dr. Myrna Thurmond-Malone, who is joining us today. She has a wealth of knowledge as a pastoral counselor, as a professor, someone that I've shared time with in the doctorate program that I've been in. So we're really happy to have her here with us today. Today we have an awesome topic, but it's a topic that's much needed around the holidays. For some of us who are struggling either with the holidays because of grief or loss or trauma, this gives us an opportunity to just discuss in some conversation and dialogue. What are some ways that we can navigate all the different emotions that we might be feeling? So today's title is, I'm Just Not Feeling the Holidays This Year. And so we welcome you, Dr. Malone. Welcome. Thanks for coming today.
You. Thanks for the invitation, and it's great seeing you, Dr. Catrice.
We're going to allow Reverend Thurmond-Malone to tell us a little bit more about her and a little bit more about her background first.
My background is in trauma, specifically trauma and victimization of Black women. I have my MDiv, my Master's of Theology, with a focus in Psychology of Religion. I have a Master's in Clinical Psychopharmacology, and I have my Doctorate in Pastoral Psychotherapy. And I also have several postgraduate certificates.
Exactly. You're talking to someone who's a pastoral counselor, life, health, and wellness coach, an author, an educator, wife, mother of three. She's been serving in so many different settings throughout her ministry and her counseling career. She also has a private practice. She's an adjunct professor in ethics and spirituality, and she does mentoring for women on the side, for women in ministry. And so, in other words, this is a woman who is committed and cares about making sure that she cares for others as well as living healthy life. So today we're so happy to have her with us. We are just going to have an opportunity to sit and talk and laugh and joke a little bit, but also talk about a topic that's pretty serious and pretty close to both of our hearts. And that is just helping people out who are struggling in some ways. And so one of the things that I want to ask her a little bit is, what led you to find a space of integration between theology and psychology?
I think first it started with my own experience of trauma and grief and just seeking answers for myself. And then that led me on a path to doing research and just trying to get a better understanding of how I can still be in relationship with God, even though I have experienced certain traumas or griefs that have impacted my identity, and then being able to be empowered and liberated to be able to reauthor my own narrative and my own story, to know that I am more than the trauma that I experienced, and that I am more than bouts or moments of sadness that I may have experienced directly related to the trauma that was perpetrated against me. And that's sexual, physical, and emotional trauma.
And it's so often that, the different trauma experiences that we might have, they reverberate. They don't just happen in that moment unless we've done some work on healing, some work on navigating through some of those painful experiences. They just continue to touch on different aspects of our life. They continue to affect our relationships with others, our relationship with self, spaces we go into. And so, I'm thankful that you go into this work and that you are committed to not only working through your own space, but through helping others work through their own spaces.
And that's a part of the journey and the process, being able to work through our own stuff, especially being an African-American woman who's ordained in ministry, and I have the other impact or the experience of trauma attached to that, and being able to embrace my authentic self. So knowing that, okay, these traumas or these ills happen against me, but they don't define who I am, and that the God I serve is big enough to hold all of that and still use me.
When you started to look for ways to integrate kind of your spiritual reality or your spiritual training into the work you're doing in trauma, what came up for you first, or what connection points or intersection points came up for you in the work initially?
I think the first thing that came up to me is relevant to my identity and being able to see myself created in the image of God. As a Black woman, as someone who's been victimized by sexual abuse and emotional and physical abuse. And it's very important whose leadership we are under in the church. It's very important as clergy leaders, especially women, we have a responsibility to be able to create a safe and sacred space for women when we are preaching and teaching, so that healing can come forth, not to use the pulpit in a way that further impacts the psyche of congregation persons. And so for me, being able to deconstruct negative theology that I heard from the pulpit and be able to embrace a God that was bigger than or taken outside of the realm of a male image. That was the first thing that I had to do for myself because of the sexual trauma. Right. So once I was able to do that, and I just began to spend quality time alone with God and praying and seeking for answers, I was able to do that. That was the first thing. And then the second thing was to be able to explore, everything that was going on within me, whether it was the triggers or the flashbacks or things coming up, this intergenerational trauma, not just the trauma that I experienced for myself, but traumas from my maternal side of the family, that's embedded within me, and being able to process all of that. And the thing that helped me out is when I went to seminary and I took my first womanist class, and it began to unpack some things and provide me with some enlightenment. And then that began the path of my journey towards healing and wholeness, and being able to reauthor Myrna, being able to see myself outside of the abuse, being able to identify myself outside of what was projected on me, being able to embrace all of me, because the abuse, you can't take it away. It's going to be there. The memories are going to be there, but it's about a process of learning how to cope, right? And knowing that it's okay to get counseling. It's okay to see a therapist. It's okay to be able to express and explore your feelings. It is necessary, especially in ministry. Mm-hmm. We all need a therapist in ministry, right? And so being in safe and sacred spaces around other Black women who were truly free, I think that's important too. And that's a reason why I became a part of Rise, because of this sistering and the importance of having these safe and sacred spaces where we could be our authentic self and unmask and begin to truly deal with trauma, to begin to deal with grief and loss, to truly begin to deal with identity, to begin to deal with our bodies, and everything that has created us to be who we are today.
Say a little bit more about Rise for our listeners who aren't familiar.
Rise is a mentoring program started by Dr. Lisa Rhodes out of Union Seminary in New York. And the purpose of Rise is to sister other women of color in ministry to offer them a safe and sacred space where they can come and unmask, where they can become vulnerable, where they can explore their calling. And if they're already in ministry, to have a place of support, a grounding, so to speak. I don't know about you, Dr. Catrice, but I know for me, coming up, it far and few in between of women mentors or someone who can actually mentor me
Very
in
true.
ministry to let me know that, yes, that I am called by God. And yes, God does use women. And yes. And so,
And for
particularly
so many
with
of us,
women of color,
it's seminary that
right?
affirms us and it says it's okay. You're all right. You're in the right place.
Absolutely. And so, what do you do when you leave seminary? And there are no safe and sacred spaces, or you're placed in congregations. And it does not matter if you went to seminary. It does not matter if you're anointed. It does not matter if you've been called and you want to be a servant leader, because of their framing of how they view or understand God or the biblical text can limit you or even place you in harmful churches and congregations that are, I'm going to say, that are not free.
Hmm.
And so because they're not free, then they place that burden on those who they're supposed to be grooming up and journeying alongside so that
Right.
we all can do and be who God has called us to be without being oppressed.
It sounds a lot like you're building
And
on your dissertation research. I know your dissertation research had to do with a womanist approach to midwifing and midwifery. Can you say a little bit more about that?
so the whole idea that we need to deconstruct these negative constructs of who God is, to be able to deconstruct the identity that have been projected specifically on Black women and how our experience of racism, sexism, and classism intersect, right? And how that plays out in the church, how it plays out in our community, how it can even play out in our home, and how all of that impacts our identity. And then as Black women, we walk around
Hmm.
armored, wearing masks. We don't have safe and sacred spaces where we can be our authentic self and truly be free, because we have to wear masks in order to protect ourselves. There should be at least one place where we can truly be free and unmasked and be vulnerable and not have to worry about protecting other people because of our experience and what we feel and what we think, because someone else may not be able to hold or be a container for us. And so it's very important to have spaces that have the ability to be those containers and to provide the healing environment that needs to take place in our lives so we can just be and accept and honor who we are and deconstruct all of the oppressive narratives that have
Mm-hmm.
been placed and projected on us, from beauty to identity to body to hair to skin color, you name it. And so all of that impacts how we walk the earth. It impacts how we understand relationships. It impacts how we understand and see God. It impacts how we see and identify ourselves.
Exactly. I think what's unfortunate is sometimes so many women don't feel like they have spaces where they can be vulnerable and just be a human, right? They don't need to be something for someone else. They can just be themselves.
And that's so necessary, especially when we look at grief and trauma, right? And so when you think about the holidays, and a lot of times when we think about grief and trauma, we don't look at the injustice of grief or trauma that was perpetrated on the body or the life of someone else that's causing that actual grief, right? So when we look at a mother who may be depressed right now in this moment because her son or her daughter was killed and taken away from her. So now she has to deal with this trauma and this grief, this overwhelming burden because it could have been avoided. And so where does she go to be able to process that? And I think theology and therapy, they go hand in hand because it's about being free. It's about being liberated. It's about being able to process and develop healthy coping skills. It's about being able to deconstruct, right? It's about being able to lament and to know that it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay that you said. It's okay. And so what's the work that needs to be done for those relevant to the injustice that was perpetrated against them, that caused the trauma, that caused the grief, that caused the loss? What spaces are available to them so that they can begin to process? Because yes, they need to reauthor their story because their loved one is gone due to the acts of violence of someone else. But what spaces are available for them? Because a lot of times when my clients come to me after seeing a secular therapist, let me say, it's nothing wrong
therapist
with a
that's not
therapist
theologically trained.
Right, that's not theologically trained, but sometimes the whole person, mind, body, and spirit, is not held in that space. Let me say it like that. Right. And so it's important when we think about healing and wholeness, the whole person needs to be able to be present. So if they have a faith tradition, that needs to be present. And their culture a space needs to be made for that. Their experience, a space needs to be made because you can't separate that. Their culture, their faith, their traditions, their social, all of that is coming into the room, right? And so how can you care for?
So our coping is built on all of those different aspects, right? Our resilience and our coping up to that point has always been based on our culture, our religious tradition, how we understand God and God moving in the world. And so all of that already came into the room. And so I think that's unique that we have to make sure that we're lifting all of those things to the surface in our care, right?
Absolutely, because even if the client come in and they don't lift it up, to know that it's coming into the room with them. And then to be curious enough when it comes up to say, well, who is God for you? How is God present, or is God present? Are you able to experience God, or why do you feel like God doesn't love you because of X, Y, and Z? Well, where in the text, based on what their faith is, that says you can't grieve, or you can't cry, or you can't lament, or that it's a certain time frame you have to grieve, right? And people don't recognize that grief is a process. And so everyone grieves differently, right? But my responsibility as a pastoral counselor is to be able to hold all that and journey alongside them in the process so that they can wrestle with, right? I'm not, and a lot of times, especially coming from a faith tradition, we have to learn how to suspend judgment. We can't be biased when someone comes in if it's something that we don't agree with.
Right.
Right. So how can we suspend judgment and still offer care? It's not about me agreeing with you. It's about me offering a space for you to lament. For me offering you a space to be able to give voice and acknowledge. And sometimes that happens for the very first time in that healing environment that's created by the counselor. Right. And sometimes,
no, go ahead.
I was going to say sometimes, especially dealing with Black women, because people see us as resilient or the strong Black woman, when we walk into a space, we can be depressed, but it can be masked. So how can you shift and create that space that allows that woman to be unarmored so she can trust you enough to share her story? And do you have the capacity to be able to hold her and not. What I hear, especially from Black women, what I've heard is that they hold back. They hold back parts of their story because no one is able to hold it. And that's the purpose of my research with midwifing, because when we think about our ancestors, especially when they were enslaved, giving birth in the midst of oppressive situations, it was the midwife and the community of women that came and surrounded them, allowing them to be able to give birth in this horrific, oppressive situation. But the power of the healing environment that was created by the midwife, although they were being oppressed, allowed that woman to give birth, so to sense. And so for me, that type of modality is very important as we look at trauma and grief, as we look at loss, as we look at transition, as we unpack identity. You know, all of it is relevant because at the end of the day, the goal is to be able to help them to develop some healthy coping skills, to be able to help them to acknowledge and affirm what they feel and what they think, and let them know that it's okay and they don't have to walk around being armored, and offers them a space to acknowledge why they have to walk around armored.
Exactly.
You know, the complicated traumas, you know, on top of one another. This happened, that happened, this happened, and then here this go, and this happened. And so how can I continue to walk around? How can I be free and walk around because I have all of this heaviness and this weight that's on me?
And you know, we have so many people who in this season are struggling with trauma, but also grief from so many different avenues, right? We're just 1 year away from what is considered a global pandemic, where people have lost husbands and wives and parents and children in some cases. And then you've got just the normal atrocities of life. We've got great unrest in this country right now. You know, perhaps someone has lost their life to, you know, some violence. There's so many different things. And now here's a season where everyone's trying to pull together and have gatherings and want you to be joyful and to ignore your feelings and to play nice. And so here are people who are like, I don't feel it. I don't feel like the people. I don't feel like happy-go-lucky. I don't feel like any of that. And so they're isolating, or they're trying to figure out, how am I going to make it through this season? What do I do to make it through this when this feels like crud? This feels horrible to me. What types of things do you try to encourage your clients or the folks that you're working with through situations like this?
The first thing I try to encourage is for them to be able to, again, give voice to and acknowledge. And then for me to be able to affirm where they're at, right? And to be able to explore all of the experiences that have impacted them to the place where they are burdened. I'm going to say burdened down, right? Carrying all of this heaviness by themselves, right? With no support, because depending on, let's say, for example, who their loved one is just dealing with death. If they were in a same gender loving relationship and their partner died, and they do have a faith, but maybe their church that they're associated with is not affirming, who do they go to? How do they process their grief? Or if a mother lost her child due to suicide, who does she go and talk to? Right? And I think that we have to be mindful, not just as therapists, but those who are shepherding or who God has called to care for God's people. What kind of spaces are we creating where we are not offering safe and sacred spaces where people can lament and know that it's okay? Because in dealing with scripture, when Jesus talks about blessed are those who mourn, Jesus does not say this
Only
type of person
ones.
or this situation. It's people who mourning. right? But as a body, I'm not going to say, I'm trying to watch my wording, but sometimes based on, I think it's more than just denominations, because some
Right.
denominations are affirmed, even though some may not be, and they may be of the same denomination, right? But being able to recognize if we are the pastor, okay, we can't handle it, but then we need to have a set of referral
Mm-hmm.
somewhere we can send that person, because it's not about us accepting or believing what they believe. It's about us being able to support and to hold, right? And a
Exactly.
lot of times they are not equipped to hold. Okay, so you're not. So where's your resource book to be able
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, call Dr. So-and-so or go to this facility over here so that they can help you, and to let them know, okay, you was with your partner for 20 years, 5 years, 1 year, 6 months. It's okay for you to grieve, because
Mm-hmm.
you're grieving the loss of that relationship, of that love, and now they have to reimagine
Right.
life without this person,
And
right?
pain and grief
And
and suffering
so
are universal.
absolutely. Absolutely. You don't not feel pain or experience suffering based on your sexuality or your ethnicity or your gender, however you identify, whether you're a Christian or a Buddhist. I mean, grief is universal. Loss
Universal.
is universal. That feeling, that detachment, the inability to reach out and touch somebody who used to hold you.
Yeah.
So what do you do with all of that? And I think that it's a great thing to have theology and therapy, but I also think, coming from a faith based, no matter what your faith is, a faith based space where they have a place that they can go, and if that faith cannot help them or support them, that they have resources available so they can send them, so that they know that they're not alone. And I think that's the biggest thing, where people want to stay isolated because they already feel alone. So why say anything? Why should I say anything? You know,
And
they're
as you said
not
earlier,
going to be able.
one of the things that we provide as pastoral counselors is safe, sacred space, right? And that space is open to all. And so one of the things that happens in that safe, sacred space is, this is a space that if you need to lament, you lament. If you need to question what's going on between you and God, then you can question what's going on with you and God in a safe space, in a place where someone is willing to journey beside you, not judge you for it, not speak harmful to you about it, but to sit and offer and hold that space with you and God together.
Absolutely. And know that it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Know that it's okay, and that there's no set time and there's no set way to be able to process. The most important thing is to process. So you can do a combination of things, from talk therapy and dance, from
Mm-hmm.
talk therapy and music, from talk therapy and journaling, from talk therapy and meditation and yoga, so it just depends on the needs of the counselee. What is it that they need? What resources do they already have in their storehouse
Right.
that they're able to use in conjunction with talk therapy?
Exactly, because it's not usually just one thing, right? It's not that this is a magic, a
Absolutely.
magic bullet. This provides you with a tool, one tool to help you on your journey. And there are a host of tools. I mean, you're going to pray and do talk therapy. You're going to also do dance or yoga. You're going to go out and be in nature. You're going to find people that are supportive and a support group to you. There are lots of different avenues. Sometimes sitting with a therapist can help you bring those thoughts and tools to the surface so that you can, develop your list of ways that are healthy for you to cope. But it's good to have a place that's safe for you to process through what that looks like. And you don't have to ignore what's going on for you. And that's usually the best thing.
Exactly. In a place where you can be vulnerable, where there's no pretense. You don't have to pretend. You don't, in this space, you don't have to have it all together. And I think that's one of the myths that comes out. My area of specialty is dealing specifically with Black women. And I think that's one of the issues, is that this pretense that we have to continue to wear a mask or have this facade, that we have to have it all together, especially as clergy women, right? Like life don't happen to us. Like things don't happen, right? Things still gonna happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you process that? How do you manage that? How do you develop ways of coping that are healthy, right? Because we can develop some unhealthy ways.
Oh, definitely.
Right? But that's not exactly. But we have to get out of the trying to use things that are only going to last short term, and that's really going to impact our health. For example, alcohol. Not that alcohol is bad, but if you're using alcohol to cope because you can't function and you drinking from sun up to sundown, that's unhealthy. That's going to impact your organs. That's going to impact your ability to function, right? That's going to create hospital bills and doctor bills, right? When you could be proactive and find a space, a safe and sacred space where you can go and you can unpack these feelings and unpack whatever is triggering you and unpack, rather than use alcohol or use food or use sex or other things that don't allow you to really process, because you're not processing. These are all limited coping skills that may have been developed over time, right? And so sometimes clients get to a point where they no longer work. The sex is no longer working, sleeping around, drinking is no longer working, right? Eating constantly is no longer working. And so what do? And I think it's imperative, especially for going back to Black women, how we have the highest mortality rate when it comes to childbirth, cancer, dealing with breast cancer. So we
Heart
have
disease.
to be able to think of heart disease, yes. But we have to be able to think in terms of mind, body, and spirit, and how, when we use unhealthy ways of coping, how it impacts our overall health. And so what are some other healthy ways that we can deal with the molestation? What are some healthy ways where we can deal with the loss of a spouse or the loss of a child or the loss of a parent, or the loss of a job? It could be the loss of a pet. Whatever you was connected to emotionally, right,
Mm-hmm.
that's now gone. What are some healthy ways that you could be able to cope and help you reauthor a new story, because you have this new transition? Like, how do you transition from being married for 50 years to being single? How do you cope with losing a miscarriage? You had all these expectations in your womb for 9 months, and now you go to the hospital to deliver. The baby room set up, but there's no baby coming home with you.
Oh, mercy. Mm-hmm.
And so it's just, for me, it's heartbreaking to know that there are so many people hurting and feel like they have no place to go. And so they turn to suicide because they feel like they're alone, right? And I think that as a society overall, we have to do a better job with being able to express that it's okay and remove the stigmas when it comes to dealing with mental health, when it comes to dealing with if you're feeling sad or depressed, however you want to, whatever label you want to put on it,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to recognize the impact of culture, be able to recognize the impact of religion, be able to recognize all of these external factors that you decide not to seek help because of the stigma that's placed on, well, what if I say something? Or where can I turn? I'll just pray about it. And not that I believe in prayer.
Definitely.
Right? And I know prayer works. Right? But for me, I did prayer and I did therapy.
Amen to
and
that.
I worship God. Right? It's not a and or, it's an and is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we only think of it in terms of it's an and. It's a and or. Like, you can't be saved coming from the Christian worldview. You can't be a Christian and you can't be saved if you're depressed. You can't be a Christian and saved if you have doubt. You can't be. Yes, you can. Life happens. So what do you do when life happens?
Exactly.
Is life not going to happen to you? How do you deal with X, Y, and Z? How do you deal with all of these traumas and all of these experiences that have compiled on top of one another and you've never dealt with them? So now you're at a breaking point. And I think that's disheartening, especially in the work that we do and what we see in sessions when the client finally comes. And I'm grateful that they're coming. But on the flip side of that, it's like, okay, when they leave this space, it's like you need talk therapy and you need psychoeducation. I think they go hand in hand.
They do.
Right? Because
and the psychoeducation piece is just being more aware of psychology and psychological tools and strategies and techniques for those who don't know what psychoeducation is. But you need to be educated as well as having tools and strategies that are going to help you navigate your own life. Like, you need to learn what boundaries
absolutely,
are.
Because and you need to learn the power of no.
You need to say it in your spirit.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's straight from the text.
Yes. And be able to be okay with your boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people sometimes when we think about just looking at love, thinking that, okay, you love them, they toxic, right? It's okay to create a healthy boundary and love them from a distance. To love somebody don't mean you got to be up in their face 24/7, especially if you know they're causing you harm emotionally.
And right? I talk about it a lot.
I don't know about you, but I know my
when I talk about it, I talk about being a good steward of self, right? Like, if you're choosing to allow toxicity to stay in your space and in your mind, that it's distracting you, you are living in chaos, you are not being a good steward of the life you've been given. And so you've got to find ways to be at peace. That's what we're called to do, right? If you're a person that believes in fruit of the spirit, you're called to live in peace, love, and harmony.
Absolutely. Amen to that, and Ashe.
But it is, and it's so complex. Exactly. It's important, it's complex, and unfortunately, we won't get a chance today to talk about all the different ways that you can navigate through these difficult emotions, particularly tied to grief or depression or trauma. Definitely. We're just scratching the surface on those topics. But I hope that in hearing this today, someone will say, okay, I think going to a safe, sacred space is going to be the way that's going to help me navigate through this. I don't have to do this by myself. I don't have to do this alone. I don't have to isolate. I don't have to act like nothing's going on for me. I can work through this. And as Dr. Myrna said, I can unpack that somewhere. That's the important part, to unpack it, not just try to mask it, not try to just negatively cope with it in unhealthy ways, but to find a way to work through it, process through to the other side.
Right, because it's about your overall well-being. You want to be your best self and live your best life. And so in order to truly do that, one has to be free and liberated, mind, body, and spirit, being able to move and operate, not held down by the weight of unresolved or undealt with trauma and grief. And you don't have to do it alone. And yes, God is able to hold you in all of what you're going through, no matter what you think, no matter how you feel. God is able to hold all of that. You don't have to deny it. And I think coming from a Christian perspective, Jesus did a great example of providing that to us. It's okay to weep. It's okay to cry. It's okay to lament. It's okay to cry out, right? And God is still able to hear and to hold that.
Yes.
Right? So you don't have to suppress that. And yes, you can do it in public, right? You don't have to be behind closed doors. And yes, you can do it in community, right? Coming from a Christian perspective, because Jesus is our example for me, coming from my Christian worldview. So Jesus is my example for that. And so that empowers me to be able to lament and to share and to cry out and know that I can do it between me and God. I can do it in community. I don't have to be isolated and close myself up in a way or keep it inside and bottle it up, doing things to keep me busy, but not really dealing with the pain or the hurt or the sadness.
And so this holiday season, if you're not feeling like maybe last year felt or in years past, then be authentic, be true to yourself, recognize where you are. If you still definitely want to go to the family gathering, go to the family gathering, but be your honest self. Just be true to yourself. Mm-hmm. If you choose this year that, hey, I want to do something else that's life-giving, do something else that's life-giving for you. But find a way for you to be healthy this holiday. I think that's what's most important. Any closing words from you, Reverend Dr. Thurmond-Malone, which we are so appreciative of today?
I love it when I think about the holiday season and I think about community. It's important for us to have water resources, a community where we can go and just connect and to be able to share and know that we don't have to suffer through alone, that there are people that can have compassion on you, right? And so you don't have to be isolated. And so it's important to be able to reach out. And if you don't have those resources, to be able to maybe ask a friend for someone, or maybe go on the internet, depending on what city and state you live in. There are resources out there and that are available. We just have to take the initiative to be able to see what's available if we don't have those spaces that can provide us with those resources. They can reach me at www.drmyrna.com, DRMYRNA.com.
You can contact her if you want to know more about resources, or you can always reach out for us on our website. Thank you guys so much for attending today. Just want to remind you that this podcast is not a substitute for mental health counseling. We really believe that it's important for you to have your own relationship with a professional therapist. That way you can navigate through what your own challenges are. So we're glad that you came today. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Thurmond-Malone. I'm going to get it right before it's all over. We appreciate your voice today. We're so thankful for the work that you're doing and really glad that you stopped by. Take care of yourself and be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or catriceglenn.com.